On a hill west of Snowflake, Arizona, stands a temple, the culmination of a legacy established by families more than a century ago. Their strength and commitment to honor God and His Son, Jesus Christ, through relentless adversity, left an inheritance of faith. And like the mighty cottonwoods along Snowflake's Silver Creek, their faith was firmly rooted to withstand the harsh and hammering winds.
I don't think there's ever a time that I don't thank the Lord for such good parents and such good grandparents, choice people that was willing to give up what they had and their homes in other places and move to Snowflake.
This ground, this area is almost a sacred, hallowed place because of the sacrifices and the hardships that were made by those who came here first, by those who were called to come and carve a place out in this desert wilderness.
I've always felt like I need to answer to those ancestors sooner or later about what I've done with my life.
During the winter of 1873, Brigham Young, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, called William Jordan Flake and 13 other men to search northern Arizona for suitable land where families could establish homes. Young promised them a blessing of fresh meat every day. They traveled light, and their faith was rewarded. William's wife, Lucy Flake, records in her journal,
"He was gone 7 weeks, had a hard, cold trip. They did not find anything or place that looked like a settlement could be made there."
3 years later, in 1876, Brigham Young issued a new call to William J. Flake and others, ultimately 200 families, to return to the Arizona wilderness, not for exploration, but to settle and stay in the barren, hostile land which Flake had earlier declared uninhabitable. President Young's instructions were clear.
Sell all that you have that you cannot take with you. Take your family and go. Leave nothing to come back to.
Sick at heart, some did not accept the new call. First, their enemies had driven them from established homes in Nauvoo, Illinois. Then they were asked to leave Salt Lake City to build in remote areas in Utah. And now again, the call came to leave extended family in the center of the church, where they were close to the temples of the Lord. Most would sacrifice this blessing the remainder of their lives. But despite the sacrifice, William obediently sold 240 acres of choice farmland and his 2 homes for half their value.
We had a fine sod log house. The farm was about 3 miles from town. William was fixing it up nice, fencing it off in fields and pastures. We thought we was fixed for life, or nearly so.
The spirit of obedience was also shown by others who were expected to be packed and on their way within weeks. William D. Karchner was now very old and in failing health after settling other regions. When his family begged him to refuse the call, fearing he would not survive the trip, Karchner declared,
"If I should die on the way, bury me with my head toward Arizona, so the Lord will know I tried."
And a difficult trial it was. One family left Bountiful, Utah in November. On Christmas night, they reached Kanab near the Arizona border. The next morning, they awoke buried in snow.
We were real cold, and Mama was tired because she was going to have another baby. Our brother was born, but he only lived a little while. Later that night, our papa cried when he thought we were asleep.
Severe weather, births, and deaths were continuous companions, and the formidable terrain impeded the trek. The way from Utah to Arizona was across the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry, the only way for wagons to cross the Grand Canyon for 550 miles along the gorge. Traversing the river on the flat-bottomed ferry boats was treacherous.
When we got to the deep, muddy Colorado, I was very much afraid. A raft went to pieces in the middle of the river. It was loaded with cattle that had to swim to the bank. The men on the boat barely made it. They built another boat, but folks were afraid to go on it, especially me.
Once on the other side, they faced a steep and jagged climb. Apostle Wilford Woodruff described it thus:
Lee's backbone was the worst hill ridge on earth I ever attempted to cross with a team and wagon. We could only gain from 4 to 24 inches with all the power of horses and 2 men rolling at the hind wheels. Going down the other side was more steep, rocky, and sandy, and much worse than going up.
The wagons had to be taken apart to squeeze through the narrow passage on Lee's backbone. Pioneer John McNeil spent a long day helping 2 other wagons make the climb, but night fell before he could move his own wagon. His daughter Sarah Alice Mills records,
The next morning, the other families were gone, and we had to get through the passage alone. Papa sat in the blazing sun with a hammer and chisel, chipping away. After working through the day and night and all the next day, part of the huge rock tumbled down.
At last, the gap was wide enough for one wagon to go through at a time without being taken apart, blazing the trail for many more Arizona pioneers. Accompanying William J. Flake and family on their trek to Arizona were the Bradys, Stewarts, Wests, and Gales. Along the way, Lucy Flake records,
We had 5 men besides our own family to do for. Most all the work fell to me. I stood and washed clothes when the snow was very deep all day. There was a young boy died in the company. They called on me to wash him. The water would freeze as quick as it touched the child. It was the first time I ever washed the dead.
Eventually, the bedraggled company camped along the Little Colorado River near the present-day town of Winslow, Arizona. The land was barren, the water brown. They built irrigation dams, but floods destroyed them. Concluding there must be a better place, William Flake and James Gale scouted the surrounding territory for weeks until they discovered James Stinson's ranch along the banks of the Silver Creek.
We sat down to talk as Stinson's man was fixing supper. We sat there until 2 o'clock in the morning. By that time, we had bought his entire ranch for $12,000 and 450 head of Utah cattle.
When Flake and his company brought their families 55 miles to the site, how they rejoiced. 15-year-old Charles Flake writes,
We entered the Silver Creek Valley on July 21st, 1878. This was the prettiest valley I ever saw.
As far as the eye could see, the rolling hills were covered with tall, waving grass. A few cottonwood trees and willows fringed the banks of the silvery stream. We climbed out, kneeling down on the mossy banks, bathed our faces and drank to our heart's content the first clear water we had seen in months. Everything looked like we were welcome here.
After months of struggle, these colonizers had at last found a home. A few weeks later, in August, the Karchner, Clayton, Palmer, and Miller families arrived. Close on their heels were the Hunt, Larson, Smith, Rogers, Rollins, Fish, and Hewlett families. Also arriving that first year were the families of Stratton, Decker, and Lundquist. Others who would join the fledgling community were the Willis, Ballard, Freeman, Savage, Turley, and Gardner families. As inviting as the Silver Creek appeared that July day after months on the trail and at their previous camp, it was small consolation for the anguish felt. In Utah, they had been close to family and the temple.
It seemed like we were in heaven sure when we were working in that holy place.
That kind of heaven would never again grace their earthly lives. Sacrificing those unique blessings along with family and security was the price to pay to spread a legacy of obedience and faith in Jesus Christ to families in future times and other territories. In the the Silver Creek Valley, James Stinson shared his corn crop and shot wild cattle while waiting for final payment from William Flake. Upon their meeting, Stinson said,
I know this mule was part of the deal, but I can't part with him.
The mule stays here, Jim. You're obliged to keep your bargain.
And I must buy the mule, no matter the price.
Well, no matter the price, the mule is not for sale.
As Stinson started to leave, dejected, Flake called him back, demonstrating the spirit of charity that would prevail with all who would come to this valley.
Jim, you've been a true friend and a gentleman. You've suffered with us, you've worked with us. Now we want to give you a token of our appreciation, this mule.
It was during Flake's trip to Utah for the cattle to pay Stinson that the town received its name.
I was so homesick, William said I could go with him to Utah and take Roberta. On the trip, we met Apostle Erastus Snow. With him were Jesse N. Smith and Ira Hinckley. William asked Brother Snow to organize our town and give it a name. Brother Snow replied, How about Snowflake? Snow for me and Flake for you.
To complete his assignment, Elder Snow called John Hunt to be the first bishop of Snowflake and Jesse N. Smith to be the stake president, presiding over all the settlements of eastern Arizona. Their precious church had been organized by proper authority, but epidemics and the rigors of pioneer life took their toll. The first death was that of little Willie McGrath, buried southwest of town. Grave markers soon dotted that hillside.
The diphtheria has come to town and our family is quarantined. This morning, one of the twins, 5-year-old Vinny, died. They made a casket and buried her today. Papa had to walk behind and watch from a distance. When he got home, Mother told him little Mary had passed away while he was gone. She was only 1 year old. Papa says we shall be with them again because we are an eternal family. But, oh, how we miss them.
With nearly every hardship was a dreaded companion described by one settler.
The wind, blowing with a furious monotony, cut away at morale and determination until at times it seemed life could scarcely go on.
Morale was recurrently low, and the people longed to return to the comforts of their former lives. During a conference visit by Apostle Wilfred Woodruff, he prophesied,
If you will remain here and build up this country, I promise you in the name of the Lord that more leadership will come out of this stake, Eastern Arizona stake, than from any other stake in the church. And one day you will listen to General Conference in your homes, and your isolated communities will grow together as one.
The promises bolstered and renewed their courage. But poverty was prevalent, and hunger an immediate threat.
We obtained some wheat that had been threshed by sheep and took it to a grist mill turned by burros. Everything, sheep pills and all, was ground into flour. The smell when baking was not so good, but we ate it.
Julia Smith Ballard remembers spending hours as a young girl braiding straw into hats with the instruction of her mother.
We had to take sacks and cut up for pants for the boys. We were so impoverished. Wagon covers made clothing for women and girls.
Joseph Fish bought boots from John A. West and paid for them by cutting from juniper trees 533 posts and 1,066 stakes for rip-gut fences. Newly arriving families were the most destitute of all. One family arrived with not a morsel of food. The total of their belongings fit into one 50-pound bag, but they forged ahead with faith. Faith enough for miracles, as the one recorded by Natalia Farr.
So many times we scraped the last flour from the bin, but then went back the next day and found enough to make another loaf of bread.
In the face of such hardships, the families clung to their faith and unfailing determination to make Snowflake their home, motivated by the support and assurance of visiting church authorities.
Although I was an infant when President John Taylor visited Snowflake, I heard my parents talk so many times of his declaration that someday a temple would be built in Snowflake. According to some people, he actually examined the surrounding hills and identified a possible site.
Through the years, the family often recollected how the young boys would play in the hills west of town and claimed to be on Temple Hill. Another first settler, John Reedhead Jr., later ordained a Snowflake State Patriarch, similarly prophesied of the area and its future.
It was the hardest place to live that there was in the church, but someone has to live here, and I think it as well for me as for anyone else. This is a healthy place and good people, but the people are poor. We need money to build temples. A temple has to be built, and temples be built all over the United States. Oh, what a great work there is for this people.
Recognizing there should be a great work despite their destitute condition, just 2 months after the arrival of the first colonizers, President Jesse N. Smith declared,
"We will join our neighbors in every laudable undertaking, like building churches and keeping up schools."
Determined to thrive rather than just survive, the families rallied to construct a suitable school within the first year. Within 5 years, they started work on the church house using red brick made and burned in Snowflake. The arid climate and wind were a real threat, and fires sometimes destroyed their hard-built homes and meeting places. Undaunted by these losses, the community worked together to rebuild the ruined structures to be more lasting and more beautiful. The present-day Main Street Chapel is a resulting landmark of such efforts after ruin by fire. It is a chapel where every president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from John Taylor to Gordon B. Hinckley has visited. Money was scarce for any building venture, and when the Women's Relief Society was organized in 1880, they developed the Sunday Eggs Project to erect their own meeting house. Eggs laid on Sunday were collected on Monday and donated to help the building efforts.
This morning, Mama sent Janie and me out to gather eggs. We got 2 baskets full of brown and white ones. We went down the road selling them for 10 cents a dozen.
These pennies multiplied to more than enough for their building, which was completed in 1891. The minutes recorded,
"We loved this new home as it was the center of our spiritual uplift. Many a time we united our faith in prayer circles for the recovery of loved ones and subsequently saw miraculous healings. In addition, time was taken up sewing carpet rags, piecing quilt blocks, some reading and bearing testimonies."
The Relief Society gave the women a sense of unity and camaraderie, and they thrived on a network of service.
I'm 38 years old today. I ironed, fixed baked potatoes, dried apple cobbler, went to Relief Society. They surprised me with a program for my birthday. Several wrote sentiments. I later went down to see Lila Turley's little Sarah, who was strangely ill. She died at 9:15.
Whatever the trouble, none carried their burdens alone. When George Abel Gardner fell from a scaffold 3 stories high and his leg had to be amputated, neighbors gathered food and clothing to leave on his doorstep. Then they brought guitars to serenade and cheer the family. Such was the character of these women who had the faith to follow their men into the wilderness, the fortitude to stay, and the initiative and foresight to create a wholesome and uplifting home for their families. In the meantime, children were maturing and desiring to marry, but they needed a temple of the Lord where husbands and wives, parents and children are joined together as families for eternity. For the Snowflake couples, this meant nearly 500 miles of arduous travel along the twisting wagon trail to the nearest temple in St. George, Utah, retracing the grueling passage through the narrow rock and across the Grand Canyon and Colorado River. Their route became known as the Honeymoon Trail.
After spending weeks preparing for the journey, I couldn't believe that the day had finally arrived. John was so sweet the whole trip. During the trek, while I slept in the bed of the wagon, John slept underneath the wagon. It took some getting used to having Uncle Silas as our chaperone, but just knowing we would be married made it bearable.
The pioneers' belief in eternal marriage forged the beginnings of strong families, and these families needed to be strong, for not long after the community had settled, fathers of several households were called to serve as Mormon missionaries in all parts of the world. In many cases, these men were gone for several years, sharing the same gospel that had enriched their own lives.
I cried most of the afternoon, which I hope will last me a while, for I desire to bear it bravely and encourage him in bearing his part in carrying the gospel abroad. But oh, it is hard to feel that you will be alone for 2 or 3 years. How I pray for comfort and guidance from the Lord until John returns.
May Hunt Larson reflects on her husband's mission call.
We were shocked that Alof was called just when our boys are getting into that smart aleck stage. The letter came telling him what he must have, how much money it will take. I know not where it will come from, as we haven't $1 and owe $30 at the store.
The next Sunday, she wrote,
After meeting, quite a number of people came in with donations for Alof. He's received upwards of $70. Our shop turned to gratitude. The Lord truly opens the way to bring to pass His righteous purposes.
Charles Ballard was called to West Virginia. His first wife had passed away, leaving him with 5 small children. He then married Julia Smith, only 17, and they began to have children. One of Julia's children wrote,
Although a small child, I well remember how hard Mother worked to support the family while Father was away. Besides clothing us with everything but shoes, she sewed for other people, always sitting up late at night and sewing by the light of a coal oil lamp. As pay for her work, she received molasses, dried fruit, squash, and vegetables.
Separation was difficult for the families. However, they were blessed for their faith, sometimes miraculously so.
I had baked a fresh batch of bread in the morning and left it on the kitchen table to cool. When I came back, 1 loaf was missing. No one knew what had happened to it. A while later came a letter from my missionary husband. He said that he'd been on the brink of starvation, and after asking God for help, had found a loaf of bread on the trail. This happened the same day my loaf had gone missing. I knew God was watching over us.
These missionary widows needed faith, but they also needed wood for fuel. During times of separation, Snowflake citizens bonded to make sure the needs of all were met. The Thanksgiving Wood Dance was one such event.
While us women prepared a feast, the boys and young men chopped winter firewood for the missionary wives. In the evening, everyone attended the dance, and we did dance. Even those sitting on the sidelines enjoyed the music and watching the fun.
Still other challenges came from the frequent territorial disputes with the Aztec Land and Cattle Company, which in 1884 bought 1 million acres of railroad land and shipped in thousands of head of cattle. The tough, uncouth cowboys of the Hash Knife outfit, employed by the company, tormented the townspeople and tried to intimidate them off their lands. Rather than answer the cowboys with a fist of hostility, Snowflake extended a hand of friendship.
Who would have thought baseball would be an answer to our prayers? I thought the Cowboys were yet another trial to endure. But the more Tommy played ball, the nicer the Cowboys became.
That same friendship was offered to the native Indians. O.D. Flake records their reaction to the death of Charles Flake.
When the Apaches heard that Charles had been fatally shot, they grabbed their guns and, with tears rolling down their cheeks, asked where the man was who done the killing. When told he was dead, they were satisfied, but mourned the death of a friend.
Although hard work was the staple of survival, these settlers recognized the value of entertainment and culture in their isolated wilderness. One contributor was Mary Jane West.
After they pitched their tent and the bed and stove were set up, Mary Jane asked that the organ be carried into the tent. She sat at the organ playing softly "Home, Sweet Home," with the boys joining in song.
Some socializing was the result of their work.
We especially look forward to the squash peeling and corn husking bees, the latter usually held on a moonlit night. Refreshments of parched corn and molasses candy were never served until a certain amount of work was done.
Primary fairs and Relief Society bazaars were anticipated events.
Mothers brought their best jams and jellies, bottled fruit and preserves, cakes, puddings, pies, pickles, and kraut. The boys made doll cradles, dish cupboards and tables, ladders, milk stools, and boot jacks.
Within a few years, the colonizers' faith bore fruit. An 1888 article in Salt Lake City's Deseret News about the Silver Creek area reported,
When the Latter-day Saints first located in this valley almost 10 years ago, we were visited with frost every month of the year. But like many other places where the people of God have settled, the elements have been tempered for their good.
After 2 decades with only elementary schools, families longed for a secondary education. Carl G. Mazur, the great educator who had established Brigham Young Academy, visited Snowflake. May Larson writes,
Brother Mazur is here. The good old man understands his work well and gives just the instruction necessary. He urged us to build an academy, and he promised to send us a good teacher.
The promised teacher came in the person of Joseph Peterson, whose mission call was to establish the Stake Academy and secondary education. Peterson's influence extended beyond the classroom. A new manner of dancing was causing a stirring controversy. Jesse N. Smith warned against the practice of swinging around in a wanton manner. Square dancing was acceptable, but young people were engaging in round dancing, and the Snowflake young people joined in. Heated debate among parents ensued, and the leaders finally decided to allow the youth to round dance in Snowflake in the company of their elders.
The day for the first dance with its new rules arrived. music for the waltz started. But for an agonizing moment, no one ventured forward. Then Joseph Peterson, the revered and respected professor, took his wife Amanda by the hand and proceeded to waltz. Thus introducing Snowflake to round dancing.
Under Peterson's direction and with great sacrifice, the beautiful brick academy was built in 1901 and new classes created. 9 years later, on Thanksgiving Day, the academy burned to the ground. Though heartsick and discouraged, the people were not deterred. Monday morning, classes were in session, utilizing other town buildings. 1 year to the day of the Great Fire, the cornerstone for a new academy was laid. When it opened its doors 3 years later, a bona fide high school with college preparatory classes had been established by Brother Peterson. Samuel Smith noted at the Academy's rededication in 1913,
17 years ago, we almost abandoned this land because the Aztec Land and Cattle Company demanded $20,000 for title to several sections occupied by our people. Now we have a building on a single lot worth $25,000.
Describing the dedication, young Martin Dagan Bushman recorded in his journal,
Thanksgiving of 1913. All the Snowflake stake was keyed up to the idea they would get to see the prophet Joseph F. Smith. He was coming to dedicate the Stake Academy after it had burned and been rebuilt. Most remarkable was when he said,
As you are a good people, you are prospering. I noticed you have quite a few cars. You could have a temple here. At some future date, you will have a temple.
President Smith's prophecy did not end at the dedication. 3 days later, he, with other general authorities, met with the local leaders in the stake presidency meeting. The minutes recorded,
President Smith discussed building a temple in Snowflake. The prophet said that when he returned to Salt Lake City, it would be considered.
Again, the people were thrilled by the promise of their prophet, but a temple was still in the distant future. Meanwhile, the Snowflake citizens would continue to broaden their abilities. The music of the Orrin Karchner family band, which included his wife Annie Hunt and her sisters, wove itself into the hearts of this area for generations. Theatrical companies were formed to stage plays, operettas, orations, and debates. Professor Peterson helped students write and produce 14 senior class programs. Some of them performed at the Sinks, a natural phenomenon 10 miles northwest of Snowflake.
I'll always have a vivid picture in my mind of a 50-foot dragon in Beowulf coming down the trail to the floor of the sink shooting fire from his mouth.
One 15-year-old boy from Pinedale desired an education enough to walk more than 30 miles to the academy, carrying only a violin and bow. He had no place to stay, no change of clothes, and no books. But Snowflake became his family and took him in. Later, as a school teacher and citizen, J. Rufus Crandall devoted his life to instituting a tradition of musical excellence in Snowflake schools and the community. Believing every youngster could play an instrument, he spent countless unpaid hours in private lessons. Once a reluctant boy came toting his violin case.
And how much time did you practice this week?
Oh, I practiced every day.
It must have been very difficult to practice. You left your bow here last week, don't you see?
Crandall's compassion in providing instruments for those who couldn't afford them and exhibiting long-suffering patience was exceeded only by his high expectations, which won more medals and trophies for his students than any other Arizona school of the time. Without doubt, the character of Snowflake is a result of all who first courageously came and stayed and built. Their attitudes, sacrifices, and enduring faith are represented in the acknowledgement of a few.
William J. Flake envisioned the possibilities of all eastern Arizona, and many of the area's communities owe their origin to his foresight. A fitting epitaph could be, he bought ranches, he made them towns. He wanted to be mighty useful, and he knew how to do it.
I found Jesse N. Smith deeply grounded in a knowledge of the gospel, well up in the learning of the day, splendid of judgment in settling troubles, and a man of the cleanest life. He was ever industrious, painstaking, dignified, and honorable.
Our first bishop, John Hunt, was the adjudicator of troubles between neighbors. He had the courage of his convictions, was unflinching in the discharge of duty no matter how unpleasant, but with a tender heart to aid those in need. He passed his gifts in music, teaching, and writing poetry and prose to his children.
For Joseph Peterson, success was not in accumulating wealth, but in building character. He drew from the student the best there was in him. He gave information and training as well as visions of ideas and standards of service. When he came to Arizona, he came body and soul to do his life's work.
J. Rufus Crandall, teacher, musician, choir leader, and violinist, has probably touched more lives for good in this state than any man who has lived during his time. That grand old man of music comes as near to being indispensable as anyone I know.
Surely the lives of all the founding families are monuments to their beliefs. Beliefs founded in faith, together with the fortitude to refine and improve. Roots planted by those intrepid pioneers have produced generations of descendants determined to further those beliefs. Now newcomers are putting down their own roots.
We're not of the Mormon faith, but we found Snowflake to be such a friendly, welcoming town. We didn't know anybody when we moved here, but we felt this was the place we needed to be.
From the deep roots of commitment established by its founders, the community has blossomed and helped to generate the fulfillment of President Wilford Woodruff's prophecy. Literally hundreds of church and civic leaders have come from all of eastern Arizona and served throughout the world. Over the years, prayers have beseeched the promised blessings, prayers that sometimes waned or increased but never ceased, prayers encouraged by stake presidents who continued to appeal to the first presidency of the church.
We are again reminded by our people of the prophecy by Joseph F. Smith in 1913.
As well as the promises given by the prophets Wilford Woodruff and John Taylor upon their visits.
Promises which have been prayed and hoped for since our founding.
And supported by the faith and works of this people.
We, therefore, humbly submit a proposal for a temple to be built in Snowflake, which is central to the White Mountain communities and 3 Native American reservations.
The traditions of the parents that were passed to the children stirred and prompted the persistent pleas. Pleas backed by faith and prayers in church meetings and in homes.
One night in May 1998, I was feeling somewhat low because I had again heard rumors about a second temple in Arizona. But not here. I drove down to the old Main Street Chapel in Snowflake. As I gazed upon the historical old church, I began to ask the Lord why the temple was going somewhere else. This old church and stake had been a spiritual hub for all of northeastern Arizona. She had been the mother of so many of the stakes in this area. Shouldn't she have the honor to be the place for his holy house? The longer I talked and pleaded my position, the stronger the Spirit came upon me until I was bathed in tears, and the Lord told me not to worry, that the temple would be in Snowflake. My feelings of love, adoration, and praise were overwhelming. I was so grateful for the knowledge that in time a temple would come.
Perhaps it was the Founders Monument that initiated the process. An invitation to President Gordon B. Hinckley to dedicate the monument led to a formal proposal once again requesting a temple in Snowflake. In January 2000, Snowflake descendant Ira Fulton presented that proposal to the prophet in person.
We were stunned one Monday afternoon to receive a telephone call from the prophet. We couldn't believe that he would actually visit us here in just 4 days to view possible temple sites.
Before he left Snowflake on that windy day, he looked at all the family pictures in the entry of our home. Tapping me on the chest, he said, "President Reedhead, families are forever." He tapped and repeated 3 times, "Families are forever."
Less than a month later, during the last session of General Conference, in President Hinckley's last address, Snowflake citizens sat on the edge of their chairs with bated breath to hear,
"Now, additionally, we announce at this conference that we hope to build a house of the Lord in Aba, Nigeria. For the pace, we may be delayed in Ghana, but we hope there will be no delay in Nigeria. Others in Asunción, Paraguay, Helsinki, Finland, Lubbock, Texas, Snowflake, Arizona, and somewhere in the Tri-City areas of the state of Washington. And so we shall go on in the process of bringing temples to the people."
On a characteristically windy day, September 23, 2000, Quorum of the 70, Rex D. Pinniger, presided at the groundbreaking ceremony. When construction began on the Snowflake, Arizona Temple in November 2000, the inspiration of a prophet was confirmed. The hill President Hinckley had designated was perhaps the only elevation for miles around not full of sand and gravel. The temple would sit firmly on solid rock. The statue of the angel Moroni was placed atop the temple on July 21, 2001, exactly 123 years to the day that the pioneers entered the Silver Creek Valley. Each stage of progress thrilled and excited the people as the dream became reality. During the first 2 weeks in February 2002, almost 95,000 people, an unprecedented number for a small temple, toured the inside at a public open house. On the cold, clear morning of Sunday, March 3, 2002, President Gordon B. Hinckley arrived to dedicate the Snowflake, Arizona Temple. He was accompanied by Neil A. Maxwell of the Quorum of the 12 and Dale E. Miller of the Southwest Area Presidency, along with others.
Thank you for that wonderful music. Thank you very much for coming out and being here in the cold to sing it. And thank you all of you who are here this morning, staying out here in the cold. We won't be long, but it will be significant, that which we do. And we'll now proceed to put a little mud in the cornerstone.
Why does the Lord want a temple in this little town? I do not know for sure, but over 100 years ago, He sent some of the greatest spirits that ever lived to come here and establish a church and make a home. I think they did their job. The strength of the blood of Israel is evident in these mountains and in all the surrounding stakes of the current temple district. The leadership President Woodruff promised would come from this area has happened. It has influenced the world through its strength of character and commitment to principles of truth. This has been our greatest gift to the world. I want the people to know that the Lord was completely involved in bringing the temple here. I do not know the future and can only contemplate what growth may take place, but the Lord chose this site and revealed it to His prophet.
And thus, just as the roots hold the giant cottonwood steady, so has the legacy of faith and the resolve to improve willed by those first families been a strength to this community. More than a century ago, God planted a seed in an isolated corner of the Arizona wilderness, and succeeding generations of men and women of faith and perseverance nurtured that seed and caused it to grow. Indeed, the sacrifices of the past are a reminder that continued faith and obedience bring blessings to families forever.
The family ties go back so far, and we have a feeling of strength and bonding with our elders.
They made us proud of our heritage.
The faith and the obedience and desire to do what was right has passed on through the generations.
Oh yes, I have a very favorite part of town, my own home, and I can be very satisfied to stay right here the rest of my life.
I believe God leads us where He wants us to be. This is where we belong.
I feel like it's been a privilege for me to have lived here. This is home.
I love this little valley, it will always be my home, a special place in all the world, no matter where I may roam. This land